Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. It started at Olive Garden on a Thursday night. Her phone lit up before the breadsticks hit the table. She smiled, that slow, professional smile she used at work, and said it was just a quick call. She walked outside, leaving her half-eaten salad behind. Through the glass, I saw her pacing, her voice soft, her face alive in a way I hadn't seen in months. When she came back, she looked at me like I was part of the furniture. And then she said it. Quiet, casual, cruel. You're patient. Predictable. I don't have to worry with you. Something inside me stopped. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Just a switch flipping off. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask who was on the phone. I just nodded, paid the check, and drove us home in silence. That night, she lit one of her Target candles, the lavender one she bought for self-care nights, and opened her laptop. She said she had depositions to review. I sat on the couch, watching the blue light of her screen reflect off her face. I realized I'd been waiting 2 months for her to reach for me. 2 months of polite distance, of maybe this weekend, and I'm just tired. The next morning, she left early for work, a Starbucks cup in one hand, her phone in the other. I stood at the window, watching her drive away, and felt the silence fill the room like fog. That was the moment I decided. Not to fight, not to fix, just to observe. I started noticing everything. The way she laughed at messages she'd never explain, how she locked her phone even in the kitchen, how her perfume changed. She was living a different life, and I was just a placeholder in this one. So I stopped waiting. I started making calls of my own, quiet ones. To a realtor, to a bank, to a man I found on Craigslist who was looking for a place in our neighborhood. I didn't plan revenge. I planned release. By the time she noticed the change in me, I was already gone in every way that mattered, except physically. She still thought I was waiting. But I wasn't. I was preparing the house for someone else's future. It was subtle at first, the way she spoke about him. He's sharp for an intern, she said one night while reheating takeout, scrolling through her emails. I asked what his name was. She didn't look up. Evan, she said, the word sliding out like it didn't matter. But it did. She said his name like it was already familiar, already safe. I stopped trying to ask more. Her phone buzzed constantly now. Sometimes she smiled at it, sometimes she sighed. She called it work stress, but stress doesn't make you glow. I'd see her leaning on the kitchen counter late at night, texting, her face softened by that dim Target candlelight. It wasn't guilt I saw. It was attention, redirected somewhere I no longer existed. I started leaving early for work, not because I had to, but because I couldn't stand watching her live somewhere else while standing in the same room. My days were spent at construction sites, mud, noise, reality. While she lived in boardrooms, air-conditioned perfection, talking about leverage and liability. We weren't in the same world anymore. One afternoon, while she was on another late call, I opened our joint bank app. 2 new charges stood out: expensive lunches downtown, boutique restaurants I'd never been to. Both receipts signed in her name. I didn't need to check who they were for. I could already picture her there, laughing, her hair pulled back, her voice low, her guard down. That night, she came home and said she was exhausted. I nodded, handed her a glass of water, and watched as she sat down, eyes half closed. She didn't notice that I was looking at her differently now, not with resentment, but calculation. The next morning, instead of driving to the site, I stopped by Home Depot, picked up paint, a few tools, told the cashier I was fixing a few things around the house. But really, I was preparing it for inspection. I wanted it spotless, silent, ready to leave behind. Every brushstroke was a goodbye she'd never hear. Every tightened screw was a piece of closure. She thought my quiet was submission. But silence, I've learned, is the sound of strategy forming. Weeks passed, and my silence became a mirror she couldn't read. She'd walk into the kitchen, glance at me, hesitate like she'd forgotten the rhythm we once had. There was no anger in me anymore, only clarity. She mistook it for calm. It was detachment. One Friday night, she said she was meeting a client for drinks after work. She wore that gray blazer I'd always liked, the one she used when she wanted to look untouchable. I nodded, told her to drive safe. She left without asking if I'd eaten. I didn't wait up. I didn't even check the time when she came home. The sound of her heels on the floor didn't mean anything now. The next morning, While she was still asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The Craigslist ad had been live for 3 days. A man named Greg was interested. Cash buyer, serious tone, no small talk. I called him. We set a meeting for Monday. He didn't know I wasn't telling my wife. He didn't need to. That weekend, I finished the small things, patched walls, fixed the railing, repainted the front door. She barely noticed. She spent most of her time on her iPhone, smiling at something unseen. When I asked how work was, she said it was demanding, but her tone was almost pleased. I didn't press it. I didn't need proof anymore. By Sunday evening, I watched her from the doorway as she prepared for another week. Starbucks cup on the counter, laptop open, earbuds in. She was everywhere but here. That night, before going to bed, I walked through every room. The quiet was heavy but peaceful. I realized the house had become a museum of things that no longer mattered. Her framed degrees, my tools stacked neatly by the garage, photos of smiles that were just rehearsed moments. I stood there and thought about how she'd turned intimacy into leverage, how she measured closeness in conditions, affection and timing, and how I'd accepted it. Not anymore. Monday morning, I met Greg at the property. He looked around, nodded, said he'd take it. No negotiations. No delay. That night, she told me she had to stay late. I smiled and said, of course. It was the last lie she ever told me that I chose to accept. 3 weeks later, the papers were ready. The realtor handled everything quietly, just as I asked. No sign in the yard, no neighbors whispering, no trace of movement she could sense. I timed it perfectly. She was deep into another case, buried in conference calls and court prep. Her focus was her shield. It made her blind. At night, I'd hear her typing in the office, her voice low and controlled on speakerphone. Once, I walked by and caught a name, Evan. The same intern she mentioned months ago. Her tone was soft, measured, but familiar in a way that stung. I didn't stop walking. I didn't say a word. I just kept heading toward the garage, tightening the last bolts on the shelves, making sure every tool was in its place. I wanted to leave the house cleaner than we found it. Closure should look neat. By then, the distance between us wasn't silence. It was structure. She had built her own emotional office space around herself, and I had built my exit through it. She controlled intimacy. I controlled reality. When she texted that she'd be late again, I replied with a thumbs up. She didn't know that while she was sipping wine at some dim downtown bar, the final signatures were being filed. The night before I left, I sat in the living room. No lights on, just the faint smell of lavender from her Target candles. I looked around and realized how much I had built here. Every wall, every repair, every quiet effort to keep things standing. And how easily she'd turned those walls into silence. At dawn, I loaded what little I cared about into my Ford Ranger, tools, some clothes, my grandfather's watch. I turned off my phone and left it in the kitchen drawer. No note. No goodbye. By the time she returned from court that afternoon, the house was hollow. The echo must have told her before she saw the empty walls. The realtor's folder was on the counter, one paper on top. The title transfer. When she read it, she'd finally understand. She wasn't the only one who knew how to walk away without a word. I didn't go far. I rented a small place 2 towns over, nothing fancy, just quiet. A single-story unit near the highway, where no one knew my name. The first morning there, I had breakfast at a Waffle House off Route 9. Black coffee, eggs, and a kind of peace I hadn't tasted in months. Nobody expected me to speak. Nobody was waiting for me to explain. I was invisible, and it felt good. From that distance, I started watching life keep moving without me. Her firm posted photos on LinkedIn. Victories, press mentions, awards. She stood in the middle of those shots, polished and sharp, like nothing had shifted. I knew her expression well. It was the same mask she wore at home when everything was already falling apart. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I checked her public calendar from the firm's website. Habit, not jealousy. A corporate event downtown. The same place she used to say she was just grabbing dinner. I didn't need to imagine who would be there. I could already picture it. The young intern, eyes bright, listening to every word she said like it mattered more than air. That was her drug, admiration, not affection. I closed the laptop and leaned back, realizing something important. For the first time in years, my world didn't revolve around waiting. I didn't need to know what she was doing or who she was talking to. My silence wasn't a reaction anymore. It was my environment. 2 weeks later, the sale cleared. The funds hit my account, neat and final. I didn't celebrate. I just drove out to the edge of town, parked the truck near an unfinished site, and sat there watching the steel frames rise into the evening sky. It reminded me of who I was before her, someone who built things, not begged for them to hold. She thought power meant withholding. But real power is letting go before they even realize you're gone. When I drove back that night, headlights flashing against empty roads, I understood something deeper. She hadn't lost me when I left. She'd lost me long before, when she started saving her warmth for someone who hadn't earned the cost of it. A month passed before she reached out. Her number flashed across my phone like a memory I'd already deleted. I let it ring out. A minute later, a text appeared, short, confused, almost fragile. "Where are you?" I didn't answer. Silence has a gravity of its own, heavier than any word I could have sent. 2 days later, another message. "I came home, and the house, it's gone." That made me smile, not out of spite, but recognition. She was finally living the consequence of her own detachment. For years, she'd treated affection like a switch. Now, she was the one standing in the dark, searching for a light that wasn't there. I kept scrolling through my phone, ignoring the notifications as they stacked up. Calls, voicemails, even an email from her work account, formal and pleading at the same time. She was unraveling, but quietly, the way people like her do when the control slips. Meanwhile, I built a new routine. Mornings at the same Waffle House, where the staff already knew my order. Days spent on-site, running projects again, hands in the dirt, not paperwork. Nights were quiet, Netflix sometimes, or just sitting outside listening to the hum of passing trucks. For the first time in years, I was living in the present tense. But she wasn't done. One evening, my foreman mentioned he'd seen her in town, standing near the old neighborhood, talking to the realtor, asking questions. Apparently, she looked lost, not angry. That was when I realized she wasn't trying to find me out of love. She was trying to find the version of herself that only existed when I was still there to hold her together. The next morning, she sent one more message. "I just want to understand." There was nothing to explain. I hadn't left out of rage or betrayal. I'd simply followed the logic she created. If closeness was conditional, then so was my presence. I didn't block her. I didn't respond. I just let the silence stretch until it became the only language left between us. And for once, she was the one waiting. She started showing up where she thought I might be. My old gym, the construction office, even the diner near the highway. She didn't say anything to anyone, just looked around, searching. The woman who once had every answer was now chasing ghosts. And I was one of them. A friend from the firm called me one afternoon. He didn't know about us, not really, but his tone said enough. "She's different lately," he said. "Keeps to herself. Seems distracted." I thanked him and hung up. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was confirmation. The balance had shifted. The silence had done what words never could. At night, I sometimes thought about how quiet the house must be now. The echo of her heels, the hum of her laptop, the scent of those lavender Target candles, all gone. I imagined her sitting in that emptiness, realizing she'd been holding on to power that wasn't real. You can't control someone who stops playing the game. Meanwhile, my world had narrowed into something pure. Mornings at Waffle House, the hiss of coffee machines, the low murmur of strangers who didn't know my story. Evenings at the site, where progress was tangible, foundations poured, beams raised, structures that didn't lie. It felt honest. It felt earned. One afternoon, I saw her name pop up in a mutual post on Facebook. A firm event, maybe. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. The intern wasn't in the photo. Maybe he'd moved on too. I realized how predictable that was. He'd chased the idea of her, not the weight of who she really was. That night, for the first time, I didn't think of her at all. No memories, no what-ifs. Just sleep. Deep, unbroken sleep. In the morning, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Can we talk?" No name, but I didn't need one. I stared at it for a moment, then turned the phone face down. There's a peace in being unreachable. She used silence as a weapon. I used it as an escape. The difference is, I survived mine. It was a Tuesday when I saw her again. I was at a supply store near the job site, grabbing a few things for the crew, when she walked in. No warning, no build-up. Just her, standing there between aisles of lumber and paint like she didn't belong to that world anymore. She looked smaller somehow, her confidence replaced by something quieter. Her voice trembled when she said my name. I didn't speak right away. I just looked at her, waiting for the part where she'd start explaining. She didn't. She just said, "You really left." It wasn't accusation, it was disbelief. As if she'd built her entire reality on the idea that I'd never walk away. I told her I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. She blinked, like the words didn't compute. Then she nodded slowly, almost like she understood for the first time what respect actually cost. We stood there for a moment in that sterile Home Depot light, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and fresh paint. She looked around like she was seeing my world for the first time, the one built with hands, not words. She said she missed me, but it sounded more like regret than love. I didn't move closer. I didn't reach for her. I told her I was doing fine, that the house sold, that I'd settled somewhere quieter. She didn't ask where. Maybe she knew it didn't matter anymore. Before leaving, she said, "I didn't think you'd actually let go." I smiled just enough to let her know I already had. After she left, I stayed in the aisle for a while, staring at the spot where she'd been. There was no anger left, just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm when everything unnecessary has been cleared away. That night, I drove back to my place and sat outside, the truck engine cooling in the dark. For the first time, I realized she hadn't come to find me. She'd come to confirm that I was really gone. And I was. Completely. After that day at Home Depot, she stopped trying to find me in person. Instead, I started hearing about her from others. A mutual friend mentioned she'd taken time off work. Another said she'd been passed over for a promotion. Too distracted, too off. That was how people described her now. Off. Like a radio signal she couldn't tune back in. I didn't take pleasure in it. There's no victory in watching someone fall apart over a mess they built themselves. But I won't lie, it brought a strange sense of balance. For years, she'd decided when things began and ended. Now, time was deciding for her. One evening, I scrolled through Facebook and saw a photo from her firm's charity gala. She wasn't in it. Evan was, though, smiling next to a different attorney. That's when I knew the illusion had cracked. The admiration she once used to feel powerful had moved on to someone else. It always does. She'd built her world on being desired, not on being known. And when the desire faded, the silence came for her too. A week later, I got another message, longer this time. She said she didn't understand how I could be so calm, how I could just walk away from everything we'd built. I almost laughed. Because that was the thing. I had built it. Every wall, every late payment, every quiet compromise. She just lived inside it like it was owed to her. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because there was nothing left to fix. She'd never listened when I spoke. Maybe she'd finally learned from what I didn't say. At work, the foreman asked if I'd ever go back. I told him I already had, just not to her, but to myself. That night, I sat outside under the porch light, the same calm hum of the highway in the distance. For the first time, I understood what freedom really sounded like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet. And in that quiet, she was finally hearing everything I'd been trying to say all along. Months passed. The calls stopped. The messages faded, and life found its rhythm again. I kept working, building, creating things that stayed built. Every morning felt cleaner, sharper, as if the air itself had stopped carrying her name. I didn't think about her often anymore, but sometimes, when the sun hit the concrete just right, I'd remember her face the way it looked that last day at Home Depot. Lost, human, smaller than the myth she'd built around herself. One evening, I drove past what used to be our street. The house looked different now, new curtains, different paint. Someone else's laughter drifted from the backyard. It didn't sting. If anything, it felt right. That place had needed new voices, ones not strangled by quiet resentment. I parked for a minute, just watching. Then I drove off, headlights cutting through the dusk like a clean line between past and present. Later that night, I stopped by the Waffle House. Same counter, same waitress, same coffee. She smiled when she saw me and said, "You look lighter these days." She was right. I was. Because I'd stopped carrying things that weren't mine to fix. When I got back to my apartment, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from her. Just a few words, "I understand now." No apology, no plea, just that. For a moment, I thought about replying, but I didn't. Some messages don't need an echo. I closed the laptop and stepped outside. The night was calm, the kind that makes you aware of every sound. The hum of streetlights, the distant engine noise, the rhythm of your own breathing. I thought about how everything had started with waiting. Waiting for affection, for attention, for change that never came. And how it ended not with shouting or revenge, but with a simple decision to stop waiting. That's the part she'll never fully understand. She thought I disappeared, but I didn't. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. And in that silence, I didn't lose anything. I found myself. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.